Good evening. Welcome to the Thursday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, Yankee, don't go home. President Obama promised that all our troops would leave Afghanistan before he left office. But today, the commander-in-chief ordered an about-face. Miranda Khan reports on this reversal from our Newsmax Prime newsroom. Miranda?
JD, President Obama had originally planned to pull out all but a small, limited number of troops by the end of 2016. Not coincidentally, the timeline was to coincide with the final weeks of his presidency. Here's what the president said about that drawdown back in June of 2011.
Our troops will continue coming home at a steady pace as Afghan security forces move into the lead. Our mission will change from combat to support. By 2014, this process of transition will be complete, and the Afghan people will be responsible for their own security.
But today's announcement changes that plan dramatically. The president will now leave the 9,800 troops through 2016. Then he'll drop that number to 5,500 by the year 2017, with the hopes of keeping military operations as non-combat only. The president says he made this decision after, quote, honestly assessing what's happening on the ground.
The bottom line is, in key areas of the country, the security situation is still very fragile. And in some places, there's risk of deterioration. But maintaining our current posture through most of next year, rather than a more rapid drawdown, will allow us to sustain our efforts to train and assist Afghan forces as they grow stronger.
When asked by reporters if this decision is to back off of his promise to draw down troops in Afghanistan if it was disappointing, the president claimed his administration anticipated that this may happen. And for the first time, he said both he and the next president will continue to assess the conditions on the ground in Afghanistan when considering re-implementing the delayed drawdown of forces in that war-torn nation. JD, back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined now via Skype by former intelligence officer Derek Harvey. Derek served as a former advisor to General David Petraeus. The retired Army colonel joins us from the University of South Florida in Tampa. Likewise from Tampa, we welcome retired Master Sergeant Scott Neil. Scott was one of the first American soldiers deployed to Afghanistan. Colonel, let's start with you. This was to be the cornerstone of President Obama's campaign to get our troops out for all intents and purposes. What do you think this does to Mr. Obama's legacy?
Well, in my view, it improves it because the president has stepped back from an arbitrary political decision to pull out of Afghanistan where the conditions were not going to be set for success. So I'm glad that he's made this decision. It took far too long to make the decision because it was clear to military leaders, political leaders amongst our allies in Europe and elsewhere, as well as NATO, that there was going to need to be a sustained commitment with training, a counterterrorism mission, and financial support to keep our partners in the Afghan National Security Force and President Ashraf Ghani, who is a good, courageous leader trying to reform the country, to give them the capabilities to sustain this going forward. It's a good decision.
So, Scott, we just heard Derek. He's in agreement with this. Are you?
Half of me says yes, and the other half says no. The part that I feel, bad about is those young Special Forces captains and team sergeants who are the combat advisors. And they're the ones, Special Forces have been in since early 2001, and they've been fighting beside the Afghanis all along. And really, when you talk about more troops or less troops, you're really talking about those Special Forces teams. And the burden's already been on those teams for so long. I'm interested in seeing what type of troops he thinks will stay there an additional year.
And when we take a look at this, Colonel Harvey, this is really the concern. I mean, having troops there is one thing, but if they're troops that are stationary and have to be preoccupied with their own protection, that could portend real jeopardy for the remaining Americans, could it not?
It's possible, but I think we need to be clear. This mission needs to continue for a number of years. It could be 5 to 10 more years to sustain and make the contributions necessary to get this country on its feet. We have an interest in this, and that's why we ask for the sacrifices of our service people. It's an important mission. We've already sunk a lot of costs. We've got good partners on the ground. They have their challenges. We've known all along this is going to be a generational fight, and we shouldn't shirk from that responsibility.
Let me go back to you, Scott, because the president is saying, hey, look, our guys are only there to train the Afghanis, and yet it's described as a counterterrorism role. Now, that to me says our guys are going to be in the thick of the fight. Are we just engaged with the president playing, I guess, some sort of semantic hopscotch?
Well, I believe so. So the particular counterterrorism campaign, you have very specific forces which are very well equipped and they're very well supported. What you don't realize is those combat advisors, like you saw last week, that were assisting the Afghan commandos and their special operations units who are actually fighting. They are the most vulnerable. They are the most vulnerable to be lured in by the Taliban in incidents like the hospital hit, where it takes a tremendous amount of combat effort, but yet the strategic message is that America did wrong.
Colonel Harvey, you are encouraged by this. I know you may have questions about just how this commander-in-chief has performed thus far, but in endorsing this, give us the best argument why this needs to continue at this point.
One is Afghanistan does matter to our security and to the security of the region. This is the place where Al-Qaeda took root and still exists in that battle space. Two, you've got the Islamic State working around the margins in that part of the country. If it is allowed to fall back and become disrupted and fall into disorder again, we could have a grave and desperate situation where we're going to have uncontrolled zones and an inability to try and shape that environment. I think our security interests, first and foremost, are tied to some outcome there that is going to take some time for us to get to. It's unfortunate that we're going to have sacrifices along the way, but we're not in street-to-street combat. We don't have U.S. Army infantry battalions and Marines fighting in the streets, and there's no intent for us to be going back to that type of posture.
Scott, you said you had mixed reactions to this decision. I'm interested on your take, the way the enemy perceives this. Do you think that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are saying, wait a minute, the Americans are hanging around? Does this create trepidation in those terror camps?
I think it further discredits America as a whole. We're wishy-washy on our policy. We can't really get our military strategy right. We're very reactive politically to conditions on the ground during combat operations. I think the Taliban and all of, the nefarious actors are watching America and they're smiling a bit because we're reactionary right now. We're not coming from a strength position, nor do we have a sound policy that allows our military to take the direct action that it needs.
Gentlemen, about a minute and a half remains, and I would be remiss if I did not turn our attention back here to this country, specifically a system outage at airports yesterday. Now, the no-fly watch list system crashed momentarily, and that caused some delays. Colonel, officials say it was a brief processing system glitch that caused this outage. Are there any security concerns that the data on that list could have been compromised?
I don't think so at this point in time. I'm sure there are going to be people taking a good look at what transpired. I think it was a glitch. I think the response, they were able to shift to a manual system. It was about 90 minutes of disruption, which, was magnified significantly for the people that got caught up in all the large queues. But I'm not particularly concerned about this, J.D.
All right, Derek's not concerned. Scott, your take on this, about 40 seconds.
Sure. I think we're extremely vulnerable right now in our infrastructure, our cyber infrastructure, our power infrastructure. All of these are starting to, collapse systematically among us. And to affect that many travelers in one swath, it affects commerce, it affects the American perception about our own government. I just think there's a lot more to it than we're realizing.
All right, gentlemen, we thank you very much. Colonel Derek Harvey from the University of South Florida tonight. And Scott Neil, Scott, we're going to ask you to hang around because when we come back, Fred Fleitz will be here. We want to discuss what is transpiring in Israel as Israelis are now the target of Palestinian terror attacks. Now, you heard what Colonel Harvey and what Scott Neil had to say about Afghanistan. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear them. Send them to me at newsmaxtv.com/comments. Did you know that if you suffer cardiac arrest outside of a hospital, you have just a 7% chance of survival? Heart disease kills more people than any other medical condition in the United States each year. World-renowned cardiologist Dr. Chauncey Crandall has dedicated the last 30 years of his career to helping patients win the fight against heart disease. And that's why he's written this best-selling book, The Simple Heart Cure. The Simple Heart Cure reveals Dr. Crandall's groundbreaking 90-day program that helps stop and actually reverse heart disease. You'll discover how to slash your risk of a deadly heart attack by 61%. 8 steps to safely lower your blood pressure. Proven ways to banish your bad cholesterol. Strategies to unclog your arteries without surgery, and much more. This book retails for $24.95, but you can get your copy of Dr. Crandall's The Simple Heart Cure free with this offer. Just go online to newsmax.com/cure or call 1-800-524-8836.